We are the strongest nation on the planet Earth, and we're in a stalemate with Iran. We're begging to get back into a deal that you all trashed in the first place.
During his Senate hearing, Booker was out to get Rubio, pushing many half-truths while constantly interrupting him. But once Marco got the chance to speak, he dismantled his claims one by one, exposing how out of depth Cory really was. So if you enjoy content that cuts through the noise, hit that subscribe button and let's jump right into it.
Now with the crisis with Ebola, we see that the challenges that have been brought about as a result of our surveillance, early detection, and the like. So I'm just very concerned about what the administration's strategy is, because we're clearly seeing here that what goes on the continent of Africa directly affects our public health as well.
Well, first of all, I don't agree with that assessment. I mean, first of all, it's not about cutting back. The response here is not just how much money you spend, it's what results you're going to get. Now, let's talk about Ebola for a second. Ebola, the outbreak in Ebola was in a war-torn, isolated rural area in the DRC. That's where that began. Since that time, our response has been very quick, very rapid.
Well, so you're saying you did not cut early detection, Pierce. I'm not talking
I'm saying that whatever you're pointing to as a cut is not the reason why there was an Ebola outbreak.
I'm not connecting the two. I'm simply saying.
Well, you are connecting them. You said that our cuts...
Senator Rubio, I'm not trying to get in an argument with you. I would really like to actually have my questions answered.
Dude, you'd probably get an answer if the guy was actually allowed to finish a sentence. This also isn't the first time we've seen attempts to tie the Ebola outbreak in Africa to policy changes made by the current administration. A couple of weeks ago, the narrative was that it happened because of USAID cuts, while Booker tried to connect it to CDC cuts, which is an agency Rubio has nothing to do with. If we're going to use that logic, then what about the massive outbreak more than a decade ago, when all of these programs were fully funded and operating? Should we have blamed Obama for that? Of course not. Because this disease has a tendency to pop up every few years, regardless of who occupies the White House. Instead of acknowledging these literal basic facts, Booker doubled down on his tangents and he kept interrupting Marco every chance he got.
We cut early warning systems on the continent.
It had nothing to do with the Ebola outbreak.
So I don't need to tell you, Secretary Rubio, that we're living in a place where an infectious disease crisis anywhere is a threat to public health everywhere. The United States has made major reductions in these areas that have put us more at risk. If you're talking about this clearly Ebola crisis, there's other things and other cuts we've made, and you see it factually. Even our own State Department personnel that I've talked to are saying we're less prepared for a global outbreak than we were before.
I don't agree with that assessment. I don't know who told you that at the State Department.
So let's move on. My time is limited.
I know, but that's an important question. I don't want to eat up your time, but I need to answer that because I just don't agree with that.
Mr. Secretary, you can't even agree on the facts.
Because that's not accurate. I mean, again, you look at what we've entered into with these countries.
It's not accurate that we cut early detection.
Because those have all been repurposed in different arrangements that we now have with these countries. As an example,
I would like, for the record, because we're not going to cover it in my short time, if you're telling me we are as prepared or more prepared before the Trump administration came in, I'd like to see the facts.
I think when these reforms are finalized, which we're on the verge of doing, we're actually going to be better prepared.
Listen, I'm not going to bore you with the details of the reforms Rubio mentioned, but it does include two major ones that could end this quickly. The first is our withdrawal from the World Health Organization and dealing directly with other countries, which gives the U.S. more control over how it responds to potential outbreaks. The second is focusing resources on stopping diseases at the source before they spread further, something HHS highlighted in a fact sheet released earlier this year. These two steps are different than what happened with the pandemic and China, where decisions often moved through layers of international bureaucracy. Booker then pivoted to the Iran conflict and tried to praise the JCPOA in the process. We're going to play that right after a quick word from today's sponsor. Recently, we covered Saga Metals, trading as SAGMF in the US and Saga in Canada, a company we've followed closely on this channel. But we are revisiting this story sooner than expected because in a very short time, it looks like they've hit another home run. What they've accomplished in under 6 months has changed the scale of this company. Less than 48 hours ago, Saga announced a 100% drill success rate across all 57 drill holes, achieving it ahead of schedule. But that's only part of the story. They also secured $10 million through a financing round dedicated entirely to drilling, adding major capital to an already aggressive program. They've also secured a strategic titanium acquisition from under Rio Tinto, a mining giant worth over $100 billion. And that was in the same district as the world's largest titanium mine. On top of that, the Wolverine project expanded their footprint even further in one of the most significant mineral corridors in the region. So why is this happening so fast? Simple, titanium, and critical minerals are now central to national security. With Project Vault, executive orders, and billions in federal backing, Washington is pushing to secure domestic supply chains. Plus, a State Department ministerial is bringing together 55 foreign ministers focused directly on critical minerals. Saga is positioning itself directly where policy, capital, and defense demand are all moving. And so far, they've over-delivered in the first half of 2026. So if you want to learn more about this story, check out the link in the description. Now back to the video.
The Strait of Hormuz, I was listening to their conversations you had with some of my colleagues. We've now seen the Strait closed for months, and you explained that we're going to see an opening of the Strait, and that ultimately the exchange we will get for that is after that fact we will release certain sanctions. Is that correct?
No, that's not what I said. What I said was that if they open the straits, we will lift our blockade.
Already with the March relaxing of sanctions, allowing Iranians to sell oil to the Chinese, estimates have been between $10 and $50 billion they got from that relaxing of sanctions. How much money might we see in a deal in our relaxings of sanctions in order to get rid of the highly enriched uranium and stop their enrichment?
Well, let me just tell you on that portion. The sanctions that were released on Iran were boats on the water. And so that oil was already out in the marketplace. It was sold at market rates, but the sanctions covered, and to the extent we've been able to enforce them, we have the revenues of those sales. So yeah, the Iranian oil was unsanctioned so that it could be sold, but the revenue would have to flow back to blocked accounts, which our sanctions were able to go after. We've also seized, I believe, 6 vessels in the Indo-Pacific that involved Iranian sanctioned oil on top of it.
Listen, you can support the current Iranian conflict or oppose it. That's not the point here. What stood out was that Booker seemed far more interested in acting outraged than making a coherent case. He leaned heavily on half-truths while doing so. The reality is that Iran is currently losing billions of dollars under the current blockade, and we are seeing an increased divide within the country's political system. Whether we should have reached this point in the first place, that's a completely separate topic, which Booker avoided entirely, choosing to spend his entire time defending the JCPOA.
That was the exact deal that you guys vilified, that the president and you vilified President Obama from having.
Yeah. Now,
so here we have a worse situation where our adversary and our enemy, who's causing havoc in the region, who is funding proxies and terrorists, has discovered, thanks to you all, the power of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz.
No, they didn't discover. They knew that a long time ago, and they've done it before.
And now we're begging to get back into a deal that you all trashed in the first place.
There's no one begging. I don't
Clearly,
know.
this is
Senator Booker, your time's up.
But
Senator Rubio, since he's
I do want to address some of these
respond.
points because they go to the heart of the matter. No one's begging for anything here. The Iranians might be begging because their economy's losing hundreds of millions of dollars a day. That they are losing. Understand, Iran had street protests going on before all of this started. All of those factors, economic factors in Iran, are far worse today than they were 6 months ago when those protests were happening. They have hyperinflation. Their currency's completely devalued. They're struggling to make payroll for their government workers. Iran is in a very serious situation. And if it was up to the political class there, and I understand everybody there is sort of radical in some way, but if it was up to the people that actually go to elections and wear the suits and you see on TV, they'd probably make a deal tomorrow. I don't know where you're getting this perception that Iran is stronger.
We probably know only a small fraction of what's actually happening behind the scenes, because neither the United States nor the Iranian government is naive enough to reveal every detail and weaken its position at the negotiating table. Again, whether we should have become involved in this conflict, it's a separate matter. And recent polling suggests that nearly 70% of Americans would like to see it brought to an end. But one reality remains impossible to ignore. This issue has been kicked down the road for years, and if the end result is another weak agreement that simply delays the problem and guarantees another showdown in the future, then it's kind of difficult to argue that that's a real solution.